What is up, everyone? Happy Thursday. Welcome to another edition of my office hours. My name is JDM, aka Josh David Miller, and this is my time every single week where I answer your questions about startup traction from idea all the way to product market fit. We've got some good ones today. Really excited to kind of dive in and get those squared away. If you want to ask a question for next week's office hours or for any office hours after that, you can hit up the link in the description, which is actually this link right here. And you can submit a question in text, in audio, or in video. And if you submit a video question, I'll actually play it right here before I answer it. So without further ado, let's actually just dive straight into the first question here. And our first question comes from a consumer packaged goods founder. And the question is, okay, so I finally got my patents. I've been working on this for a while. And I kind of got all that squared away. I'm ready to take this to market. I'm ready to go get some customers, but I need, investment for manufacturing, all that. Can you intro me to some investors? I'm sure you know investors, right? It's that is the question I get. And I get a version of this pretty frequently. I mean, I get asked for investor introductions every week, but I get asked this particular kind of thing where I got patents and, now it's and now I want to get it in front of customers, and to do that I need to get some investment dollars. Can you intro me? That particular version I get probably once a month, maybe, like fairly frequently. And the short answer is no. I won't do that. I won't do that for you. But I'd like to give a longer answer. And the reason is there's a couple of things in here, a couple of things buried inside. So the first one is, like, you have a patent, but you don't have any customers. So I'm like, okay, so why do I think that the patent is valuable in and of itself? And so let's rewind for a second here. So patents are to protect a thing from other people stealing it. And people don't steal things that aren't valuable. So the patent is to protect something valuable. And the idea itself is inherently not valuable. The only way we know if it's valuable is if customers are telling you that it's valuable, and the only way they're doing that is with their dollars. And so before you have that, do you really have anything of value? Probably not. But you're going to get some strong resistance to that. You're going to go, oh no, I know this thing. That's why I spent all these, sometimes it's years getting all these patents set up, and who knows how many dollars I'm actually getting these patents set up. So I know it's valuable. And it's what we call the sunk cost fallacy, but that's for another time. But let me come at this from a different side. So you want to be intro to investors. And the reason I'm saying no is because the investors are going to tell you no. And I don't want to burn the relational capital introing people who are just going to get a no right away. And the reason is that you're actually not fundable yet. And I want to talk more about that. So the idea of fundable in an early stage startup is that you have to have what Alex Blumberg called a credible theory of hugeness. And that's three words: credible theory and hugeness. Let's take them in reverse order. So hugeness, right? You got to have the idea that you're a scalable startup, right? You got to have some idea like this can be really big. We got to have a big TAM, right? Big total addressable market. We want to be entering a big market so we can capture a share of that and make buku bucks. So that's the hugeness part. So that's number one. You can get a loan for something that's not quite that scalable, that doesn't have the hugeness, but you're not going to get equity investment, because their whole purpose of giving equity investment is that at some point there's a liquidity event, like an IPO or an acquisition, and that they're going to cash their equity in right at that particular point, essentially. So if you can't get big, the equity is worthless. It's not worth the risk. Okay, so that's number one. So credible theory of hugeness, that's hugeness theory. So theory is you have to have an understanding of exactly how you're going to get from where you are, which is not huge, to there, which is huge. So you have to have a theory of how you're going to get to this hugeness. And that's where it becomes a little tricky, because you have to actually be able to articulate, okay, so this is a big market. Here's how we're getting into that market. And here's the channels and messaging and customer that we're going after. Here's how that's going to work. Here's how we're going to go audience A, B, and C. And then here's our path to go from there. And so then here's our first customer, 10 customers, 100 customers, 1,000 customers. And here's how that path works, right? So you have to have a theory about how you're actually going to get there. And most of the time at this stage, you don't have one. You have a patent. And so you don't even have a theory of hugeness yet, but you very much don't have the credible part. So not only do you have to have the ability to get big, you have to have a theory about how you're going to get there, and that theory has to be credible. Credible meaning evidence. You have to have data to back up that you're actually onto something, that there's a there worth going after. And that kind of data is what we call traction. So you have to be able to articulate that this is why we think this. We think this because customers have been saying blank. They've been showing us with their behavior that, and so therefore we know that we're on to something. It's that credible part of it. It's also team matters in terms of credibility as well. You have to be able to show that you can pull this off. But setting that aside for a second and just focusing on that traction piece of it, you have to be able to demonstrate that customers want it. So in the late stages, that's purchases. Right? They right there, write you a check and great, right? They want it. It's no better evidence for that, right, than a sale. But before that, there's other things that happen too. So even if you don't have this, in production yet, if it's a consumer product, which this question was, then you need to get something from customers. You need to have a big list of committed customers who are like, if you build this, I am buying, not just like telling you that, because people will tell you anything, not just giving you their email address, but giving you some robust data that shows that they're going to do this, maybe even pre-ordering it. Pre-sales would be great. Crowdfunding is another way to do the exact same thing because they're giving you the cash up front so that you can build it. If you're not on the consumer side, if you're B2B, this is letters of intent, right? Getting businesses to sign on the line that's dotted that says you build this thing to these specifications and boom, I'm in, right? It's that kind of evidence too. And then before that, you have other forms of traction. So you have sales, and then you have this like pre-sales letters of intent type of thing. Then before that, you have evidence that customers want your solution. And before that they want a solution. And before that they even have the problem that you think that they do. And then before that there's even the customer out there that you can get in front of, right? So it's that whole train of evidence forms traction. And the more evidence you have, the further along in that process you are, the more robust your traction evidence is, the more credible your theory of hugeness is. That makes sense. That's the problem here, is that you don't have, even if you do have a theory of hugeness, which most of the time you don't have a credible one at all. And so a patent isn't the right thing to start with when you're working on something else. The right thing to start with is proving that there's a market there, and then figuring out how you're going to actually make that thing happen. And then after that comes this idea of defensibility, of like, this is where we introduce patents and that kind of thing to say, here's how we're actually going after that. So that was the first question that I got today. Good one. Get it all the time. So that's that. Go after customers before you go after investors. Always, always, always what you should do. And yes, good morning, June. It's a nice day here in California as well. Tell me about the weather. I'm super curious about it. I was working outside this morning. It was 37 degrees out, and I'm on my laptop outside and couldn't feel my fingers after a while, but it was otherwise delightful. I am very much looking forward to this change in seasons that we have here in California in November, such as it is in California anyway. Okay, so let's dive into our second question. And the second question is kind of different. It's pretty different. So let's go ahead and take a second to tackle this one. So here we go. So this one comes from Beth, who's in one of my cohort programs right now. She's got a product called Bodots, which is a delivery mechanism for pills and pet food. Kind of a cool idea. So here's a question. So she said, I have two different ideas for prototypes that might appeal to different audiences. Do I just make the prototype of my first idea, or to try to run both at the same time? I predict that you may ask, is the value proposition the same? I believe it could be if the wrapper of the flat paste is also crinkly, which can attract the animal's attention. Okay, the first part I kind of bracketed away just for space, but these two different ideas are actually kind of important. So let me read exactly what she wrote. I am already working on prototyping my Bodots pet treat that is packaged like a Lindor truffle. In this design, it's a round ball. My other idea was a flat, square-shaped paste and package it in a tea bag-like wrapper, but in foil, and it would come out of the box at the bottom like tea bags do. And that might appeal more to kennels or vet offices that need to deliver pills to many different pets at once, right? So two different things there. So very good question. I really like this one. So let's actually dive into this. So a few things to think about here. So the idea of prototyping two things at once, because we're talking about rapid prototyping, you have great flexibility to do things like that. So there's nothing wrong really with doing two different prototypes at once. I'm not sure it's my favorite choice. I might prefer to do them serially as opposed to in parallel, just because it helps me think and focus, more. But we're talking about like an hour prototype or a 2-hour prototype or at most a day prototype. So can you do two at once? You absolutely can. But that's actually not the interesting part of the question here. And the interesting part of the question here is that you're actually talking about two different customers. And that's the part that I want to drill on, because you're talking about like this Lindor truffle version that you have for your pet at home. And, I'm assuming they just like have a bag of these bow dots. And, when it comes time for pill time, they pull one out. Maybe it's once a day, maybe it's twice a day, whatever. And, they open it up and they do the paste, and they put the pill in, and hand feed the dog. And because of the crinkling, the dog is, right, and coming over. So like that's great. But then the second customer is more like, okay, we're commercialized. It's a vet office or a kennel or something like that. We're doing, one pill twice a day for 14 dogs or something. Like it's a lot of things. And so the idea of having this like bin of them with these round wrappers doesn't appeal as much. And I totally get why that would be the case. And like this idea of a tea bag like dispenser where they could just have like a big box of these sitting there and just pull one out, whoop, whoop, ready to go, does make a lot of sense, right? That they would like that. There are other things in there too. You may discover that maybe, I'm just going to throw a terrible idea here, but maybe they want actually a bucket, and the bucket is just a bucket of paste, and they just want to scoop out the paste and, do it with their hands because they don't need the wrapper in a kennel environment, right? Because if I understand you correctly, the wrapper is to attract the dog, so they get attracted to the crinkly noise. But at a kennel or a vet, that's not really important because there's no habitual behavior behind it. It's just, you're here, and while you're here, I'm giving you a pill. So maybe they don't care about that packaging piece of it at all. Maybe they would prefer to have this in a bin with a scooper. I don't know, right? So, and that's, again, terrible idea. I'm just throwing that out there that because the environment is so different ways, because the customer is approaching this in such a different way, like the value proposition might be just fundamentally different. And this is where I think like the two customer thing is the more important question than two prototypes. Because if you did like the Lindor version and like the tea bag version and put it in front of the same customer, I think that could be interesting to compare, because then you're saying to what degree is the paste the important value part, which you can also get from interviews, and to what degree is the packaging the important part. And that's the part that's harder to get from interviews. And so that might actually be super interesting. But when we're talking about those being valuable to two completely different customers, then that's where it starts to be like, this might not be great to do in parallel. It's fine if you just want to like start talking to customers, but as soon as it starts becoming time to double down on those bets, then you're probably going to want to pick, because the value props are actually going to be different. Because even if they're both attracted to the paste, the big problem at the vet's office is different than the problem for the person in their house. Just if nothing else, by volume, they're going to care about different things. They're going to care about speed and delivery, a lot, and broad taste, as opposed to something that's just appealing to the particular dog and their particular lifestyle. How they purchase it is going to be very different as well. So this, like the vet isn't going to buy it at PetSmart. They're going to buy it, from, I don't know where vets get their stuff, but I'm sure they have like wholesalers or whatever the equivalent of a pharmaceutical rep is for a vet. I'm sure they have them, right? So they come and they sell them a bunch of stuff. And so because of that, just because your distribution is so different, as soon as you start heading down that road, you're going to end up with two different businesses that you're running at the same time. And that's where it can be tricky. So, but if you need to decide like which path makes most sense to go down, then totally you could do these two different prototypes, put them in front of the two different audiences, get some real data back, and then say, okay, so what does this, which one does it make most sense to make a bigger bet on? And it might be that, they're actually both really valuable and you just have to pick, and that sucks, but that's the real world. In the startups that I work with between seed and Series A, very common that they're not having any trouble making sales, but they're selling to everybody under the sun. And so they can't scale because they're selling to too many different people, right? So they have to pick one, but that means saying no to a bunch of other people, which means saying no to sales, which is like anathema to a founder. But it's real. So that could be a very real decision you have to make. Or you might discover that when you do these two audiences, that one of them is either easier to go after in the short term because they care about something that's less difficult than the other audience. So like maybe the packaging is harder over here, and so therefore it's easier to go after the simpler packaging. Something like that, right? Or there might be other reasons, like it might be that the two audiences actually aren't equal, and so one of them does care about it more, and they feel the pain and the urgency stronger, and therefore want to go after them. Like maybe the vet's offices, I'm just gonna again make something up. Maybe the vet's offices don't care don't care as much because they are very used to delivering pills, and they just have somebody who's used to yanking open the throat and chucking the pill down and holding them snout closed, or I don't know what they do, but whatever they do at the vet's office, because if they're just already used to that, it's like, and yeah, it sucks. And would it be great to have Bodot? Sure, but this is also working, and the person buying isn't the person doing the pill delivery, and so like then it becomes harder to sell. So that you could probably do it eventually, but it's harder to sell in the short term. Maybe something like that. Anyway, so you may discover those kinds of things too. Is like, do they feel it the same way? Is it easy to sell them? Is it easy to go to market with them? Is it harder or less, because of packaging or formulation or something else? So I would think about this from an audience perspective as opposed to prototype, as opposed to the prototyping perspective, because doing 2 prototypes at once, totally cool. I might personally choose to do them in serial, but nothing wrong with doing them in parallel, as long as you keep the effort super light. But if you do go after 2 different audiences with different prototypes at the same time, I would keep in mind that you're doing a simple test to see which path to take and not trying to take both paths at the same time. So it's a great question, Beth. Really glad you asked it. I love talking about prototypes, as you know. So it's pretty cool. Okay, so got some. So June commented before, I applied for a patent for my first startup 10 years ago and got an investor, failed. Yeah, I've heard those stories. I have my own startup failure story, but it didn't involve patents. It involved every other mistake you could possibly make, but didn't involve a patent. But yes, that's the kind of thing that does happen. Okay, so question, what are some different ways to prototype a service? Healthcare consulting. Okay, so hello, anonymous questioner. So what are some different ways to prototype a service? So lots of different ways to prototype a service, depending on what it is that you're trying to test. Let me expand on that a little bit more. So when you're trying to test a service, you could be trying to test that there's a need. You could be trying to test how people buy. You could be trying to test that you get the value out of or that they get the value out of the service that you think they will. You may be trying to test an aspect of the service. You may be trying to test the particular experience of the service. So in other words, your experience is so much different, so much better than everybody else's. Then it's not a question of, is the service valuable or anything like that. It's that this experience is just so fucking amazing that I'm going to go, like, we're going to go with this one, and then you need to test that. So it's that kind of thing. There's a big array of things that you could use to prototype service. And so how you prototype that is going to be different. But let me give some examples, because that's a lame answer to just say, well, it depends, even though it does. So a couple examples. First one is, if you're trying to test, do people want this service? I've run service companies. That's actually the bulk of my career has been running service companies. And I run one now, actually. And so a consulting company, not in healthcare. But the best way, I think, to test if people want something is not necessarily to prototype the service, because we just want to see if people will buy it. I would actually just go out and see if people will buy it. I'll actually get in front of customers and try to sell them. And then that's hard, but it gives you a lot of flexibility, because like the work of an entrepreneur is almost always selling something that doesn't exist yet. But in the case of a service, it's also selling something that's completely undefined, so that you can figure out during sales what it is that you're trying to sell, like figure out what their need is and then try to sell it. And in the early stages, you can do that super non-scalable way, kind of do different things for different people, start recognizing common patterns, and start trying to synthesize an offering that makes sense across all of those things. Like, oh, you know what? They all needed these 4 things. These guys are outliers. I'm not going to do that. I didn't want to do that for them anymore. But this thing, I could scale this up. This seems like a cool need that a lot of these companies are having. So then you could start, narrowing in on something like that. So it's more how I would approach that, is like sales first, sell it, then build it after you sell it. Because you can do that with services, subject to some caveats. So there's that. But if you're trying to test, okay, well, I have a service, I know that they want it. Like, if I get in front of them, my close rate's pretty good, right? It's fine. It's like, there's room for improvement, but my close rate's fine. But I just need to get more of them in the pipeline. I've got this lumpy sales problem. It's really common to service businesses, particularly to consulting businesses, where you make a sale and it's great, and you stay busy, and then you have a lull, and then you make another sale, right? And so it's just like this lumpy sales process. And so you're like, I want to keep a pipeline coming in, so I need to get more customers coming in. I want to figure out how to find demand and then figure out how to create demand. For those, prototypes can work really well. And what you're prototyping is exactly how you get in front of a customer where you are. So in that case, it might be that I think that they are on LinkedIn, and therefore I'm going to prototype an outreach on LinkedIn. In that case, prototype might not be the word that I would use. But it's the same idea. It's an experiment that you're going to run, and it's going to involve something very lightweight, like let me create an in-mail message. Here's the template structure for this. Here's what I'm going to put in there. I'm going to send it out to X number of people. I'm going to expect Y% response rate, and I'm going to expect Z% to get on the phone with me. And that's my success, is that people are actually responding to this thing. Then everything else after that is my close rate. And if I'm getting all the people on the phone that I want to get on the phone and my close rate sucks, then I have to go, okay, well, now I need to form an hypothesis of why. Is it because I suck at sales? Totally reasonable. Is it because I'm actually getting the wrong people on the phone, right? Or is there an expectations gap? Like they're expecting one thing based on my outreach, but then in the sales call, they get something else and there's no payoff there, right? There's all those reasons why. But there's no point in optimizing the sales process before you get people into the sales process, right? So the first thing you're testing is, can I get people in? Can I get the pipeline coming in? Can I get people in the pipeline first? So you could be doing something like that. Or it may be that it's not just in mail. It could be like, I'm pretty sure my customers are on Instagram. I think they follow these influencers. And I think that they, maybe post about these kinds of things and so have these hashtags. And so then you create an ad and you put that ad in front of them and you see if they get them to swipe up and like do the whole thing there. So it could be something like that. And again, it's the same thing. It's an experiment. I'm expecting X number of impressions. I'm expecting a Y swipe up rate or a Y click the link in bio rate or whatever it is that you do. And then from that, I'm expecting Z to actually, engage with the sales process, and whether it's a phone call or some form that they fill out or application or whatever. So it could be something like that. So that's like early sales. Then it's like, how do we like scale the sales? How do we do the distribution part of that, which could be pretty cool. So then beyond that, you have, okay, well, maybe it's a part of the service that we want to actually prototype. Like, will this work well? Is this what customers want? Is this going to deliver like a wow moment or a moment of greatest value inside that, right? It could be something like that. And if you want to do that, then there's a whole different set of prototypes that you can do. One of them is you can prototype touch points. And this is a really common thing to do. So if you want to figure out like, what would happen if, we did an automated email, or maybe it's not automated, but like an email that went out to customers after this certain delivery point. It was like a nice summary report. And that's going to deliver like this big separation from our competitors who don't deliver that nice thing. Well, you can prototype that and you can test that and you can put that in front of customers, because now you're saying it's like this particular touch point in this process is going to do that. So you can prototype that. There are all different kinds of touch points like that you can prototype. Email is an easy example. Completely left field example for that might be that you want to say like, okay, well, what happens if I have this whole service, but I want an app that goes along with this just to give them information? Like, it's still a service, but the app gives them updates and stuff along the way. Like maybe you're a general contractor and it's going to show your budget and where the money's going. And here's all the people, the subs that are getting hired from that. And here's the progress and timeline. And well, wouldn't that be cool, right? But it doesn't change the fact that you hired a freaking contractor, right? Like, it doesn't change the service. So in that case, you can prototype that particular aspect of it, because what you're doing is saying, if I add this app, change this experience, if I introduce this, if I change this how part of the business model, right? How is value created? How is value delivered? If I change that part of the business model, am I going to deliver such a sufficiently better experience that customers will have that wow moment and kind of love the thing. So then you can prototype that as a thing and so forth. There's lots of different ways to do that. I would love to dive in at some point about service design thinking, which is something I have some experience in. It's how to use design thinking to design better services. It's a whole just underappreciated field of study. And there's some really interesting ways you can design just some chef's kiss services using design thinking. And prototyping is a big part of how you get to service design thinking. So that's some different ways you can prototype a service. Hope that that's helpful for that. Kenneth, welcome. Haven't seen you in a million years, but hello. I'm glad you made it live here today. Thanks so much for joining. So that was the end of our questions today, and we're basically out of time here. I will, of course, be back I'm here every single Thursday, so I'll be here next Thursday at 10 a.m. That's November 10th. However, this one will be pre-recorded because I will be literally on an airplane at that time. But definitely get your questions in advance so that way I can answer them in advance, and it'll still air at 10 a.m. because I like to be consistent about that. And then I'll be back live the following week, which will be part of Global Entrepreneurship Week. Stay tuned next week for some more information about that. But that's all I have. Thanks so much for joining. Love you guys. Love the questions. Keep them coming in. Hit the link in the description if you have a question of your own. Again, you could type a question. You can do it anonymously if you prefer, or you can record a video and I'll play it right here on the air. With that, have a fantastic rest of your Thursday. Have a great weekend, and I will see you guys soon. Peace.